Analysis.
No.
The psychology
soft
of
lighting.
indirect pressure.
No soft colors.
In Western strategic
no
thought,
soft
we
bodies.
often focus on direct
Theme of the spread
confrontation,
is
meeting
high
force with
fashion
force,
hardcore.
a head-on collision. However, Besiege Wei to rescue Zhao introduces a radical psychological shift, the art of indirection. The core philosophy
Good
is
morning.
avoid the enemy's
Parker.
strength and strike where they must defend.
Ambrose is
As a
here for
psychologist,
his
I view this through the lens of resource allocation and emotional reactivity. When an
Just
opponent
Megan.
is focused entirely
Job.
on an offensive goal, they often leave their home base, their core interest, their heart, or their source of power vulnerable. By threatening what they love or need most, you force them to abandon their current objective. The strategy originates from the Warring States period. When the state of Wei besieged the capital of Zhao, the strategist Sun Bin didn't lead his army into a bloody battle at Zhao's walls. Instead,
Cancel
he
my
struck
lunch
the
with
capital of
whatever
Wei.
his name is.
Why? Because the elite
My
Wei
schedule's
troops
already
were far
tight as
away,
it is.
and the capital was undefended. The Wei generals, gripped by panic for their own homes and families, immediately retreated from Zhao to save themselves. This is the psychology of the pivot. In any conflict,
How do I know what
there is a
answers?
Wei, a vulnerable, essential
She
point of
owns
the
the whole
opponent,
floor.
and a Zhao, the place where the conflict is currently happening. If you fight at Zhao, you suffer 100% casualties. If you strike at Wei, you win without a direct battle. It is the ultimate move of leverage. Instead of pushing against a stone wall, you pull the rug from under the person leaning on it. In modern psychology, this is called cognitive reorientation, forcing the brain to switch from an offensive hunter mode to a defensive survival mode. When the heavens, the opponent, feels their own foundation shaking, their original plan collapses instantly. Military example 1. The Battle of Gilling, the birth of indirection. In the history of Eastern warfare, the Battle of Gilling, 354 BC, is the DNA of the second stratagem. To a psychologist, this isn't just a troop movement, it is a masterclass in emotional hijacking. When an elite force is driven by the arrogance of victory, their perception narrows. Sun Bin, the strategist of Qi, understood that to save the state of Zhao, he didn't need to be stronger than the Wei army, he only needed to be more distracting. The psychology of the irresistible target. The state of Wei, led by the brilliant but conceited General Pang Wan, had surrounded the Zhao capital of Handan. Pang Wan was a hunter in a high arousal state. He was inches away from total victory. In Western psychology, we call this tunnel vision. When a human is that close to a massive reward, they ignore their periphery. Sun Bin's genius was in recognizing that Pang Wan's strength was also his Wei, his vulnerability. Pang Wan's pride was tied to the safety and glory of the Wei capital. Daliang, Sun Bin didn't send his army to the bloody walls of Handan. Instead, he launched a visible threat toward Daliang. He didn't hide his tracks, he made sure the dust clouds from his chariots were visible to Wei scouts. He created a new, primary threat that overrode Pang Wan's current, primary goal. The execution. Strike the heart to paralyze the hand. Sun Bin used a two-step psychological trap. The feigned weakness. He sent a small, disorganized unit to attack a heavily fortified Wei border town and let them be defeated. This confirmed Pang Wan's bias that the Qi army was soft. The direct threat to the Wei, while Pang Wan was laughing at the weak Qi soldiers. Sun Bin's main force raced toward the undefended capital of Wei. When the news reached the front lines at Zhao, the psychological shift was instantaneous. The Wei soldiers, who had been fighting for glory, were suddenly fighting for the lives of their families back home. Panic is the enemy of strategy. Pang Wan abandoned the siege of Zhao, forcing his elite troops into a forced march back to Wei. The data. Before and after the stratagem. Before the siege of Handan, the Wei army had 100.000 elite, battle-hardened troops surrounding Zhao. The Zhao defenders were down to their last supplies. A direct intervention by Qi at the walls of Handan would have resulted in a 70% casualty rate for the rescuers due to Wei's superior defensive positions. The stratagem, the pivot. Sun Bin moved his 80.000 troops toward Daliang. He forced the Wei army to march over 400 kilometers in record time without rest. After impact, the ambush at Giling, state of the enemy, when the Wei army reached Giling. They were at 20% combat effectiveness due to exhaustion and dehydration. The trap. Sun Bin had already occupied the high ground. Casualties. The Wei army was decimated. Over 20,000 elite soldiers were lost in the first hour, and Pang Wan narrowly escaped.
We were all friends before any
Strategic
of this
result.
happened,
Han
kind of just stayed friends
Zhuge was
after.
saved without a single Qi soldier ever stepping foot near its walls. The hegemony of Wei was shattered, and the power balance of the warring states shifted permanently. The result of indirection. Sun Bin, by never going to Zhao, he manipulated the biological imperative of protection to force an elite army
And
into
I
a
get it.
vulnerable position.
She's hot.
As a strategist,
And,
if
well,
you can control what your
don't tell
opponent
Dan,
fears,
but-
you can control where they move. Military example 2. The Battle of Moscow and the Yelnya salient, the strategic pivot. In military psychology, when an attacker reaches the
Is it
threshold
perfect?
of victory, they often
No,
fall into a
but
state of hyper-focus.
that's what
In
makes it so
1941, the German Wehrmacht's
When you're
Zhao,
married,
the
it's
target,
easy to
was
get
Moscow,
complacent.
the ultimate
Hey,
political
look,
and
you see on
logistical
that.
prize.
Really?
Their Wei. The vulnerability
Well,
was the overextended
we
flanks and
just love
supply
the bus
lines of
dance
Army
balls.
Group Center. Marshal Georgy Zhukov utilized the second stratagem to force the German war machine to halt just as they caught sight of the Kremlin spires. The psychology of target fixation.
Don't feel too bad.
As German forces neared
make it.
Moscow, Hitler and his generals, such as Heinz Guderian, suffered from target fixation. They believed one final push would cause the Soviet Union to collapse. However, this extreme concentration created a lethal blind spot. Their flanks and supply lines were stretched to the breaking point. Zhukov, a master of strategic psychology, understood that if he committed all his reserves to a direct defense at the gates of Moscow, striking the Zhao head-on, the Red Army would be pulverized by superior German firepower. Instead, he identified the Wei as the Yelnya salient, a strategic bulge that the Germans intended to use as a springboard for the final assault on Moscow, but which had poorly defended flanks. By launching a massive counter-offensive at Yelnya, Zhukov forced the Germans to make a choice: continue toward Moscow and risk being cut off entirely, or abandon the assault to save their own foundation. The execution. Threatening the supply line to save the capital. Cognitive diversion. While the world's eyes were fixed on the trenches outside Moscow, Zhukov quietly massed reserve divisions against the German flanks. The strike at Wei, the Yelnya offensive, did not target the center of the German spearhead. It targeted the logistics hubs and the divisions protecting the base of the German advance. Panic began to ripple through the German command. Encirclement anxiety, a psychological ghost that had haunted the German military since World War I, resurfaced. They were forced to divert their most elite panzer divisions away from the Moscow front to rescue the units at Yelnya. The data. Before and after the stratagem. Before, summer 1941, the German advance was relentless. Moving at a pace of 30 to 50 kilometers per day, Moscow was within artillery range. The ratio of forces at the Central Front favored Germany 2-1 in infantry and 3-1 in armor. The stratagem. August-September 1941, the Red Army launched the Yelnya offensive. This marked the first time in World War II that the German army was forced to retreat from a captured position. After impact. Strategic delay. The counterattacks at Yelnya and the flanks delayed the German advance by 3 crucial weeks. In warfare, 3 weeks is the difference between life and death. The Russian winter. This delay pushed the German assault into the brutal winter. Temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius, reducing German tank efficiency by 60% and freezing their logistics. Result. Moscow was saved. Germany never captured the Soviet capital, marking the turning point that eventually led to the collapse of the Third Reich. The result of indirection. Zhukov saved Moscow by attacking Yelnya. He did not try to stop the tide of steel with a wall of flesh. Instead, he severed the monster's hamstrings from behind. Military example 3.
No more games.
The Battle of Chancellorsville, the flank that broke the giant.
Feels the same way.
In strategic psychology, when a side possesses overwhelming numerical superiority, they often fall victim to overconfidence bias. They believe the opponent is only capable of passive defense. At Chancellorsville, the Union Army, the North, was the giant squeezing the life out of Zhuge, Richmond, the Confederate capital. General Robert E. Lee executed a daring variation, besieged Wei to rescue Zhuge, instead of reinforcing his capital. He struck the Union Wei, their
like
vulnerable
traffic,
flank and
so
rear.
we should probably head out earlier.
The psychology, the rear guard panic. The Union Army, under General Joseph Hooker, had twice the manpower of Lee. Hooker was convinced that Lee would either have to retreat or be crushed in place. However, Lee performed an unthinkable move in military doctrine. He split his already smaller force.
I took note.
He identified that Hooker's Wei was not in his fortified front lines, but in his right flank, which was left dangling in the air, and in the Union's sense of security regarding their supply lines. When General Stonewall Jackson led his troops through dense woods to suddenly appear behind the Union's lines, Hooker's psychological state shifted from hunter to prey in minutes. When the rear is threatened, the massive force in the front becomes irrelevant. The execution, abandoning the front to strike the route. The diversion at Zhuge, Lee kept a tiny force at the front to feign a rigid defense, anchoring Hooker's attention. The strike at Wei, Jackson marched his men secretly for an entire day to strike the Union's neglected right flank. As gunfire erupted from behind them, Union soldiers who were preparing dinner fled in terror. This chaos spread like a psychological virus, causing the commanding General Hooker to suffer a mental shock, losing his ability to make rational decisions. The data. Before and after the stratagem. Before May 1863, the Union had 134,000 troops, while the Confederates had only 60,000. The ratio was 2.21. Hooker famously boasted, "May God have mercy on General Lee, for I will have none." The stratagem, the flank attack. Jackson led 28,000 men on a 12-mile, 20 kilometers, march through the wilderness to strike the flank of the Union's 11th Corps. The after impact. The collapse. In a single afternoon, the 11th Corps, numbering 12,000 men, was routed and destroyed. Defeatist mindset. Despite still having a massive numerical advantage, Hooker, fearing he would be cut off from Washington, his Wei, ordered a full retreat across the Rappahannock River. Result. Lee achieved his greatest career victory. Richmond, Zhuge, was completely saved, and it took the Union nearly a year to recover their morale for another major offensive. The result of indirection. Lee saved Richmond by not being in Richmond. He understood that the best way to make a giant release his grip on your throat is to drive a knife into his heel. When the flank, Wei, is attacked, the enemy forgets their original goal, Zhuge, to save their own lives. Business example 1. Microsoft versus Netscape, the OS hegemony. V du Kin Don 4. Microsoft va Netscape, Kian Luke Kuahi Du Han. In the mid-1990s, Netscape Navigator was the undisputed king of the internet, holding nearly 90% market share. To a psychologist, Netscape was a victim of product-centric hubris. They believed that as long as they had the best Zhuge, the best browser, they were invincible. Bill Gates, however, realized that Netscape's Wei, their lifeblood, was not the browser itself, but the way users accessed it, the Windows operating system. The psychology of the ecosystem trap. Netscape was an island product. To use it, you had to find it, download it, or buy it. Microsoft utilized the siege Wei to rescue Zhuge by leveraging their control over the ground Windows that Netscape sat upon. Microsoft didn't just build a better browser. Internet Explorer 1.0 was actually inferior. They struck the Wei by bundling Internet Explorer for free into every copy of Windows 95. By threatening the Wei, the ease of installation and the cost, Microsoft forced Netscape into a defensive war they couldn't win. Netscape was fighting for
I'm not gonna
feature
pretend we don't
superiority,
benefit from this
Zhuge,
arrangement.
while Microsoft was
I mean,
fighting for
this party
distribution
is going to be
dominance,
a total
Wei.
aura farm.
When the foundation of your business
But
is owned by your
Alberto
competitor,
was more than
your
just a
product's
Korean
quality
move.
becomes irrelevant.
He was
The execution. Cutting the oxygen
and we're
line.
the type of girls
The ghost attack.
who like to have
Microsoft
our cake
initially appeared to be lagging
while
behind
eating it
in the
too.
browser race, lulling Netscape into a false sense of security. The strike at Wei, with the release of Windows 95 Service Pack 1 and Windows 98. Internet Explorer became an integral part of the OS. You couldn't remove it, and it was already there when you turned on the PC. Netscape's revenue model, selling browsers to individuals and enterprises, evaporated overnight. They were besieged at their Wei, their ability to monetize, and were forced to abandon their offensive growth strategies just to survive. The data, before and after the stratagem. Before 1995, Netscape Navigator owned 90% of the market. Internet Explorer had less than 3%. Netscape was a Zhuge, so strong it seemed impossible to conquer. The stratagem, the OS bundle. Microsoft spent over $100 million annually on Internet Explorer and gave it away for free, leveraging the 90% market share of Windows. The after impact. Market collapse. By 1998, Netscape's share dropped to 70%. By 2002, it crashed to less than 1%. The rescue of Zhuge. Microsoft saved the browser market for themselves by attacking the distribution Wei. They went from a laughingstock to a monopoly in less than 4 years. The result: Netscape, once the darling of Wall Street, was forced to sell to AOL for $4.2 billion, a fraction of its potential. And the brand eventually disappeared. The result of indirection. Bill Gates didn't beat Netscape by making a better browser. He beat them by owning the computer they ran on. He besieged the Wei, the OS and the wallet of the customer, to rescue the Zhuge, the internet market share. When you control the infrastructure, you control the destiny of everyone who travels upon it. Moving from the smoke of the battlefield to the high-stakes corridors of Silicon Valley, we enter the most ruthless era of software history. This is business example 4. Microsoft versus Netscape, the browser war. In this narrative, the Zhuge, the target, was the internet browser market. And the Wei, the vulnerability, was the distribution channel of the operating system. Business example 4. Microsoft versus Netscape, the OS hegemony. In the mid-1990s, Netscape Navigator was the undisputed king of the internet, holding nearly 90% market share. To a psychologist, Netscape was a victim of product-centric hubris. They believed that as long as they had the best Zhuge, the best browser, they were invincible. Bill Gates, however, realized that Netscape's Wei, their lifeblood, was not the browser itself, but the way users accessed it, the Windows operating system. The psychology of the ecosystem trap. Netscape was an island product. To use it, you had to find it, download it, or buy it. Microsoft utilized besiege Wei to rescue Zhuge by leveraging their control over the ground Windows that Netscape sat upon. Microsoft didn't just build a better browser. Internet Explorer 1.0 was actually inferior. They struck the Wei by bundling Internet Explorer for free into every copy of Windows 95. By threatening the Wei, the ease of installation and the cost, Microsoft forced Netscape into a defensive war they couldn't win. Netscape was fighting for feature superiority, Zhuge, while Microsoft was fighting for distribution dominance, Wei. When the foundation of your business is owned by your competitor, your product's quality becomes irrelevant. The execution. Cutting the oxygen line. The ghost attack. Microsoft initially appeared to be lagging behind in the browser race, lulling Netscape into a false sense of security. The strike at Wei, with the release of Windows 95 Service Pack 1 and Windows 98. Internet Explorer became an integral part of the OS. You couldn't remove it, and it was already there when you turned on the PC. Netscape's revenue model, selling browsers to individuals and enterprises, evaporated overnight. They were besieged at their Wei, their ability to monetize, and were forced to abandon their offensive growth strategies just to survive. The data. Before and after the stratagem. Solu.
Having fun,
Truoc
Kazumi?
Basao Mu Ke. Before,
It's so
1995,
steady.
Netscape Navigator owned 90% of the market. Internet Explorer had less than 3%.
Yeah.
Netscape was a Zhuge, so strong it seemed impossible to
Unless you
conquer.
want to watch.
The stratagem, the OS bundle. Microsoft spent over $100 million annually on Internet Explorer and gave it away for free,
Here I am,
leveraging
in
the
the middle of the
90%
summer.
market share of Windows.
Dan is a TA
after
at the
impact.
college I'm applying to.
Market collapse.
He is helping
By
me make my
1998,
application as
Netscape's
bulletproof
share
as
dropped to
possible.
70%.
Did you write
By
this?
2002,
I
it
did.
crashed to less than
No
1%.
Not a
The
single
rescue
problem.
of Zhuge. Microsoft saved
Yeah,
the browser
he's
market
hot
for
as
themselves
fuck.
by attacking the distribution
But it
way.
still sucks.
They went from a laughingstock to a
Pin
monopoly in less than
pricks.
4 years.
Speaking of which,
The result,
So?
Netscape, once the darling of Wall Street, was forced to sell to AOL for $4.2 billion, a fraction of its potential,
All done.
and the brand eventually disappeared.
Speaking of
The result of indirection.
I was thinking
Bill Gates didn't
we could
beat
celebrate.
Netscape by making a better browser. He beat them by owning the computer they ran on. He besieged the way, the OS and the wallet of the customer, to rescue the Zhuge, the internet market share. When you control the infrastructure, you control the destiny of everyone who travels upon it. Moving from the software wars to the cutthroat world of e-commerce, we encounter one of the most aggressive displays of besiege way to rescue Zhuge in modern business history. This is business example 5. Amazon versus Quidsi. https://www.google.com/search?q=diapers.com. In this case, the Zhuge was the niche dominance of the baby products market, and the way was the competitor's financial liquidity and venture capital runway. Business example 5. Amazon versus Quidsi, the capital attrition. In the late 2000s, a startup called Quidsi, the parent company of https://www.google.com/search?q=diapers.com, had mastered a specific Zhuge, the loyalty of busy mothers. They had built a superior logistical engine that offered fast, free shipping and incredible customer service for bulky items like diapers. To a psychologist, Quidsi's strength was emotional resonance. Mothers trusted them. Amazon, despite its size, was losing this Zhuge because its platform felt too broad and impersonal. Jeff Bezos understood that to rescue the Zhuge, the baby market share, for Amazon, he didn't need to build a better, mom-centric brand. He needed to strike Quidsi's way, their gross margins and their cash reserves. Quidsi was a venture-backed startup. Their lifeblood was the ability to stay profitable or raise more money. By attacking their revenue, Amazon would make them toxic to investors. The psychology of the price war panic. Amazon utilized a psychological shock and awe campaign. They didn't just lower prices. They used automated bots to track https://www.google.com/search?q=diapers.com and undercut them on every single SKU. Sometimes by 30% or more. This created a sunk cost crisis for Quidsi. For every diaper Quidsi sold, they were now losing massive amounts of money just to keep their customers. When the financial stability of the company is besieged, the Zhuge, customer loyalty, becomes a burden rather than an asset. The execution. Cutting the financial oxygen. The targeted strike. Amazon launched Amazon Mom, a program that offered deep discounts and free Prime shipping specifically to target Quidsi's core demographic. The bleeding strategy. Bezos was willing to lose an estimated $100 million in one quarter just in the diaper category to ensure Quidsi could not meet its financial obligations. Quidsi's founders, Mark Lohr and Vinit Bharara, realized their way was collapsing. Investors, seeing the scorched earth tactics of Amazon, refused to provide more capital. Quidsi was forced to abandon their independent Zhuge to save the company from total liquidation. The data. Before and after the stratagem. Before 2009-2010, Quidsi was on a $300 million revenue run rate and was the #1 specialized online baby retailer. Amazon was struggling to gain traction in the mom demographic. The stratagem, the price blitz. Amazon slashed diaper prices so drastically that Quidsi was losing money on every shipment. Amazon reportedly lost $100 million over 3 months in this category alone. The after impact. The surrender. In November 2010, Quidsi realized they could no longer besiege the Zhuge, protect their market share, while their
Hey, dog.
Wei cash was being incinerated. The acquisition. Amazon bought Quidsi for $545 million. If they had waited a few more months, the price might have been zero, but the threat of a bidding war with Walmart forced the deal. Result. Amazon successfully rescued the Zhuge by destroying the Wei. They absorbed their biggest niche competitor and integrated the technology into the Amazon platform. The result of indirection. Jeff Bezos didn't try to win the hearts of moms through better marketing. He won by striking the bank accounts of the founders. By besieging the Wei, the capital runway, he forced the Zhuge, the market leader, to surrender. When you threaten an opponent's survival, they will give you their crown just to keep their life.
I think you may
Business
have the wrong
example
idea
6.
here, Mr.
Coca-Cola
Black.
versus Pepsi, the
I don't
fountain
really,
hegemony.
treat
In the 1970s
couples.
and 80s, Pepsi launched the Pepsi Challenge,
Look around you.
a blind taste test that proved consumers
I got to
preferred
this
the
level of
sweeter
success
taste
by
of Pepsi
following the
over
rules?
Coke. To a psychologist,
No, I break.
Pepsi was winning the hedonic war, the
Anyway.
war of pleasure.
This is all about her.
They were winning the Zhuge,
you
the
say
taste
so.
preference of the younger
Where is
generation.
she?
Coca-Cola, panicked, initially tried to fight Zhuge with Zhuge by creating New Coke, which was a disastrous failure. Realizing their mistake, Coke's leadership shifted to besiege Wei to rescue Zhuge. They stopped trying to convince people that Coke tasted better, and instead focused on the Wei, the availability and infrastructure. If a consumer can't find a Pepsi, they will buy a Coke. By besieging Pepsi's ability to reach the customer, Coke rescued its market share. The psychology of the path of least resistance. As a psychologist, I know that convenience often overrides preference. If you have to walk an extra block to find your favorite brand, you will likely settle for the
Life
one
is
right in
so
front of you.
Beautiful.
Coca-Cola
Damn right
utilized
she
this by
is,
striking
Mr.
the
Diet.
Wei, the exclusive contracts with fast food giants, stadiums,
Change your mind on
and
something?
airlines. They didn't fight for
put
the
it this
tongue,
way.
they
I
fought
won't
for
be
the
charging you
fountain.
extra for today.
The execution, the institutional
kidding?
siege,
Who
the
should be
exclusive
paying
lock.
us?
Coke signed massive,
Now it's mine.
multi-decade exclusive deals with McDonald's, Disney,
Doctor?
and major airlines.
It's her
This
heart.
meant that in thousands
She's
of
gonna need
high-traffic
cardiac
locations,
stimulation.
Pepsi effectively didn't exist.
Mhm.
The global red wave, while Pepsi was winning TV commercials. Coke was building bottling plants in every corner of the globe. From post-Soviet Russia to rural Africa, they focused on being the default choice, the Wei, rather than the taste choice, the Zhuge. By the time a consumer felt the urge for a soda, the Wei, the distribution, had already decided the winner. Pepsi was besieged at the point of sale, forcing them to pivot their entire strategy towards snacks, Frito-Lay, just to maintain their growth. The data. Before and after the stratagem. Before, late 1970s, the Pepsi Challenge helped Pepsi close the gap significantly. In some supermarkets, Pepsi actually began to outsell Coke in the take-home category. The Zhuge was slipping away from Atlanta. The stratagem, the fountain and global blitz, Coke invested billions in exclusive fountain contracts. The McDonald's partnership alone represents an estimated $1 billion plus in annual revenue and serves as a global billboard for the brand. The after impact. Market gap. Coke maintained a consistent 42% market share versus Pepsi's 30% in the U.S. carbonated soft drink market for decades. The result? Pepsi was forced to abandon the direct taste war and diversify into the food business, Frito-Lay. Quaker Oats, because they realized they couldn't break Coke's Wei in the beverage infrastructure. Current value. Coca-Cola remains the #1 most valuable soft drink brand in the world. Valued at over $100 billion. largely due to its way, its unparalleled distribution network. The result of indirection. Coca-Cola didn't win by having the sweetest drink. They won by being the only drink available when you're at a movie, a ball game, or a burger joint. They besieged the way, the access points, to rescue the Zhao, their global dominance. When you own the pipes, it doesn't matter what color the water is, you control the flow. The lesson. The power of indirect leverage. The ultimate lesson of besiege way to rescue Zhao is that the most effective solution to a problem is rarely found at the site of the problem. As a leader, if you are being attacked, don't just build a shield. Look for what your attacker values most and put a knife to it. In psychology, this is about emotional intelligence. To save Zhao, you must understand the way of your opponent. Is it their reputation, their cash flow, their key talent? Once you identify the way, you don't need to destroy it, you only need to make the threat credible. The beauty of this stratagem is that it conserves your energy. You win by making the opponent beat themselves through their own panic and retreat. Remember, never fight the enemy where they are strongest. Fight them where they are most afraid.